A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you're with me today. Apologies for no show yesterday. Actually, we had technical difficulties. It was not personal difficulties this time around, but we'll give you a TMI update for Miss E here at the end of the program as well. So let's get to it. Had the opportunity on Wednesday morning to speak with Pete Forcelli, retired Deputy Assistant Director of the ATF, about his thoughts on the future of the agency. You know, we have seen a bill. I was actually introduced in the last session of Congress by Representative Matt Gaetz. It is called the Abolish the ATF Act. Now that Gaetz is no longer in Congress, Representative Eric Burleson from Missouri is the chief sponsor. It has 9 other co-sponsors, so hasn't got a lot of traction. This is the bill in its entirety. This is perhaps the most succinct piece of legislation I've ever seen. We complain sometimes about the legislatees and these, hundreds of pages, sometimes thousands of pages of legislation. It's really hard to tell what's in it. Yeah, not with H.R. 374. Nope. To abolish the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Section 1, the short title. This act may be cited as the Abolish the ATF Act. Section 2, abolishment of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is hereby abolished. That's it. That's the total of the bill. Now, I have to say, as much as we might like to see the ATF abolished, I think the prospects of that actually happening are not great. As I said, this bill has a total of 10 sponsors right now. Of course, you would need 217 votes in the House to abolish the ATF. You would need 60 votes in the Senate, unless maybe you were to attach this to an appropriations bill, in which case, a bare minimum vote, bare majority vote in the Senate could get that passed. But I think it is better for us to operate on the assumption that the ATF is going to continue to exist in some form or fashion during the Trump administration. There's been, I guess, Blake Masters' name. We talked about that earlier this week, floated as a potential ATF director. I'd say Pete's name has actually been floated as a potential ATF director as well. And of course, Pete was one of the whistleblowers in Operation Fast and Furious. And he is a guy who has, over the past several years, has called out what he sees as abuses in the agency. We've talked with Pete on a number of occasions about where he thinks this agency has gone wrong under Steve Dettelbach and the close association and affiliation with the gun control lobby, the agency viewing the firearms industry as the enemy as opposed to their ally in the fight against gun trafficking, straw purchasing, and things of that nature. So Pete actually wrote a piece about what he'd like to see in terms of ATF reform just a couple of days ago. And again, had the opportunity to sit down with Pete yesterday morning to kind of explore those ideas a little more fully. It's a great conversation. Take a look and listen. Pete, it's good to see you, sir. Appreciate you coming on the show today.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I mentioned in the intro, a lot of stuff to talk about. We've got this bill, H.R. 374. It's the shortest piece of legislation I've ever seen. It's the Abolish the ATF Act. And the one sentence is this Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is hereby abolished, right? This was originally introduced by Representative Matt Gaetz. Now that he's no longer in Congress, Eric Burleson from Missouri has taken over as the chief sponsor. There are 10 co-sponsors. I said before we started talking here, I just don't see this bill getting to Donald Trump's desk. I think the ATF is going to exist in some form or fashion under the Trump administration. The question is, what does it look like? What does it do? Right. And you've got a column out. It's now been out a couple of days talking about the need to reform the ATF. And you're not talking about like nibbling at the edges here, right? You really are talking about a structural reform to the ATF's mission, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely. And look, I have a reason for that. When I was an agent in New York, we didn't focus on the gun. It was never about the gun. We made tremendous cases, like not to be braggadocious, like some of the cases I worked on, the sex, money, murder, racketeering case. Bad guys, gangbangers, use guns to murder a lot of people. The leader of that gang, I managed to get sentenced to life plus 105 years in prison. He's in the Supermax. His name was Peter Forcelli. It was an impactful case. It cleaned up a neighborhood. Another case was the Nice Bello organization, illegal immigrant doing home invasion robberies. We arrested him. We proffered him. He was arrested on a gun charge, being an illegal alien in possession of a firearm, superseded 924C, using firearms in crimes of violence. Once we had a couple on him, then he was looking at a lot of time. The end of that case was 145 robberies, 23 defendants. This is what they pled guilty to: 6 murders, trafficking of weapons, trafficking of cocaine. And look, there were victims that we brought justice to. I mean, that's what ATF should be doing, using violations of the Gun Control Act, violent crimes, to go after violent people, not low-hanging fruit. So that's what I would propose. The other thing is, and I've said this many times on your show and elsewhere, is the industry was a partner to us in Arizona. And I wrote a book about that, like how good they were. They gave us 90% of our tips. They knew who the criminals were out there that were trying to get guns. They shouldn't have had guns. They knew who the traffickers were that were trafficking to the cartels. They were partners that we've abandoned. So, I mean, it's really get back to basics. Stop chasing the low-hanging fruit. Stop trying to make stats and numbers on crap cases going after somebody who may be a felon with a 25-year-old grand larceny of an auto conviction who has since done right with his life. Can you charge someone like that? Yes. Should you? Almost never, unless there's some other thing. He's a suspect in a murder and, victims and witnesses won't cooperate. I mean, sometimes you use other laws as tools to get people in custody, but that's what ATF needs to get back to. The other thing I would caution is, look, when I was a supervisor up in Canada, our job was to liaise with Canada. So when guns were recovered in Canada, we would trace those firearms and we would give the information to Canadian police. The Department of Homeland Security, they have a HSI, their larger investigative component, demanded that ATF give all of that trace data for every gun recovered in Canada to them because they wanted to go to FFLs and knock on doors. I refused. I felt it was part of T-Heart. I wasn't going to give that information over. I got pressure from above. Hey, why don't you just give it to them? Because they were going to go knock on the doors of the legal purchasers, perhaps legal, in the United States. Could have been straw purchasers, but I know full well that guns are stolen out of cars in traffic. Guns are stolen out of houses in burglaries in traffic. So to give a blank check to another agency to have them, and they were planning on going en masse and knocking on doors, to me, it was a bridge too far. ATF doesn't do that. I've seen cases with the FBI where an example was a murder for hire case where they charged a guy with possessing a firearm in a federal crime of violence. You'll know where this is going. As they were getting ready for the eve of trial, they wanted to trace the gun. They consulted my partner at the time, who was an interstate nexus expert for firearms. Well, it was a revolver that was made in the 1880s. It wasn't a gun under federal law. So, I mean, and then you consider that the allegedly the people who the straw purchasers in Fast and Furious were buying guns for were FBI informants. So, I mean, look, if the Gun Control Act and the NFA continue to exist, and I think they need to be tweaked mightily as well, and there's going to be federal agencies out there enforcing them, might not be bad to have ATF be that entity that's doing it, because at least they have, and I get it, it's a bumpy relationship with gun owners and the gun industry, but at least they have a relationship, and it's one that I wholeheartedly believe needs to get better.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, when you talk about the ATF sort of abandoning their allies in the firearms industry, I think it's even worse than that. I think they've attacked these allies, right? It's not just that they've let them alone. It's like, we're not going to talk to you anymore. It's like, no, we're coming after you now, right? Joe Biden said the firearms industry was the enemy when he was running for president. And the agency has treated the firearms industry, I think, as the enemy over the past few years. And, again, I mean, you talk about going after these violent offenders, as well as, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with what you said. So I'm trying to think of where I want to go here. Let's talk about some of the provisions of the Gun Control Act and the NFA and these rules that the ATF has promulgated over the past few years. Again, these aren't, to my thinking, these aren't rules that are aimed at combating straw purchases or gun traffickers, right? Even the engaged in the business rule that was broadly expanded, you could argue, okay, well, we're trying to stop gun trafficking. Okay, but then why are you crafting a rule that allows somebody to be charged with being an unlicensed gun dealer if they haven't completed a single sale of a firearm, right? That's not, you're not going to go after big gun traffickers. You've written a rule in such a way that you can now go after the little guy. You can go after the small fries. You can go after the person who, again, didn't even complete a single sale of a firearm, right? And I think that that's intentional, Pete, to go after that low-hanging fruit, as you described it. It's an ideology and a philosophy that I think is completely contrary to what the mission of the ATF is supposed to be.
Yes, I would agree. And look, we spoke about this on one of your previous episodes, if someone cares to look it up. I thought when they passed the Firearms Trafficking Act that they would have abandoned the engaged in the business violation, because I found it to be ambiguous, and you can utilize that to go after people for the wrong reasons. It's not clear. Someone who's knowingly trafficking firearms to criminals and to cartels needs to be prosecuted. I will never come off that position. But I've seen people use the engaged in the business to go after, a middle-aged guy who's supplementing his pension to sell the guns to other middle-aged guys with the limited resources that ATF has. Is that really how they should be using them? No. I would even argue that some of the things that are covered under the NFA should go away. I mean, look, short barrel rifles, for example, right? Was it a problem in the 1930s with Al Capone and everything, and Congress acted to do what they had to do? Yeah. Are people using short barrel rifles now in crimes? No. Silencers. I was pissed off when I saw that guy kill the healthcare, because I saw the suppressor on the end of the gun. And it's funny, I knew exactly what happened because I have a suppressor and I had that same problem because I didn't have the proper spring and my gun jammed. So I was like, this guy shot that gun, had it jammed in the pants. That's why he was able to clear those rounds so quickly. But right away, every count, suppressors. Former ATF acting director Tom Brandon wanted to take suppressors off the NFA. He actually wanted to move towards the Hearing Protection Act that was proposed. Look, they're not. If it's not being used in crimes, I don't think we should focus on it. Look, that's where ATF's focus should be. What are people using to kill other people? But even within that, right? We might want to look at those things. But again, it could never be about the item. It has to be about the person engaged in the conduct. Go after them, put them away forever, for all I care. But when you start demonizing the gun, you're demonizing the gun industry. You're demonizing people like you and I. I own several firearms. I like target shooting. I find it to be relaxing and somewhat meditative in nature to focus on hitting the target. I'm not the best shot in the world. I'm trying. There's people that hunt. I mean, there's people that, and look, the right to defend your family and your house. To me, those are sacred rights. And I'll tell you, I know a lot of your listeners won't believe, to almost every agent I've ever worked with, they feel the same way. There were two that didn't. Excuse me. Dave Chipman was obviously one, and there was a guy, Mark Jones, that I would describe as anti-gun. Most agents are gun enthusiasts, and I don't know if that's what draws them to ATF. And look, the other things, I didn't want to be an ATF agent growing up. I became an ATF agent because as a homicide detective, I worked with ATF guys, and they were putting some really, really bad people in jail for murders and home invasion robberies, and I felt like I could be more effective at protecting the public in this role. But it wasn't like, wow, I got to be an ATF agent because I want to take guns from people. No, that's I don't know any agents other than those two I mentioned who I believe felt that way.
Well, and I can just say, I mean, just, personally, Pete, and if folks have not read Pete's memoir about his role as a whistleblower in the Fast and Furious program, I would strongly encourage you to do so because, you have done the right thing. As far as I'm concerned. And you have, again, blown the whistle on acts that you felt were egregious, perhaps illegal, and certainly counter and contrary to the mission of the ATF. And again, I mean, you get back to talk about, deregulating suppressors. I'm fully on board with that. We've also seen this big push over the past week. Should we ban ghost guns? We should ban all ghost guns. And again, you talk about the gun versus the individual here, right? We have this national tradition of building our own firearms. And as far as I'm concerned, again, if you're building your own gun, that's not a crime. If you're selling that gun to somebody who's legally prohibited from owning one, well, that might be a crime, right? If you're using that gun that you built to commit an armed robbery or home invasion, okay, well, that's a crime. But to me, the fact that a guy like Dexter Taylor, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison and is currently sitting in a maximum security prison in New York for the violent felony of building his own guns, that to me is an injustice. That to me is a travesty. Now, again, he wasn't prosecuted under federal law. He was prosecuted under New York law.
Correct.
But when you see these, these calls that we got to make these ghost guns illegal, what is your reaction to that, Pete?
It's foolishness. But look, people are 3D printing guns, so you can ban them. People are going to make them. So who has them? Criminals have them. right? Only criminals if you ban them. Bans don't work. What bans do is they create black markets. And look, that's not just something that's limited to firearms. I've been involved in tobacco cases where you had people, for example, even like when you overtax something, it was commonplace for people to smuggle cigarettes from Virginia up to New York, right? And then because they were evading the tax, sell them for New York prices, make a ton of money. And they were using that to fund terrorism, especially the Houthis in Yemen. A lot of the Yemeni grocery stores in the Bronx were sending that money back to Yemen, and organized crime. So the same thing would apply if you start banning something like, people building their own firearms. People are going to build them and they're going to traffic them. And that's why I get upset when people try to blame the U.S. in exclusivity for the problems in Mexico. The cartels are making their own guns too. The cartels have gunsmiths. When you have pockets as deep as the cartels, you could do amazing things. So when you want to turn around and blame the gun industry, it's being disingenuous. But look, this administration has been brutal to the gun industry. Like even with the name and shame list that came out that I was adamantly against, no previous director that I worked for, and I've talked to other people at ATF that had more time on than I did, none of them ever said we all say unequivocally, no ATF director in history would have done that. This was because Dettelbach was in bed with the White House and that Office of Gun Violence Prevention. I would hope that Trump would change that. Now, some folks would say, get rid of it. I'd like to see him change it into the Office of Gun Education and maybe bring back some of the things that you used to have in high school. Like when I went to high school, you can learn how to shoot a rifle and they had rifle teams and whatnot. Again, this is in our Constitution, the right to keep and bear arms. Criminals misuse them, punish them, but leave everybody else alone. And don't demonize an industry that hasn't done anything to anybody. They make a legitimate product that criminals misuse. And people like to point to Mexico. By the time the gun has made its way to Mexico, several crimes have been committed, right?
Right.
Prosecute the people that are committing those crimes. More often than not, they're not prosecuted. And you read the book, you know that.
Yeah. And listen, as far as the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention goes, we were talking with Diana Muller from Women for Gun Rights yesterday, and I think she and I are both on that same page. I mean, we might have a different idea about what the name of that should be, but I think it would be a mistake just to shut that office down, right? The gun control advocates were very, very smart about, okay, we've got a platform here, right? We've got the White House as a platform, and not just a platform, but we can now use the executive branch to direct hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to our various pet projects. What if some of that money was, again, going to, as you say, real firearms education? What if it was going to build publicly accessible gun ranges in places where, the powers that be say we don't want anybody to shoot legally? We would rather have somebody learn about guns on the street, right, than with a firearms instructor. And we made this, so culturally taboo. I think you're right. I think this is an opportunity to actually put our government to good use in terms of strengthening our Second Amendment rights, in terms of, again, enabling real education. And again, maybe even efforts to reduce suicide, reduce violent crime that don't involve putting new gun laws on the books and don't involve criminalizing lawful gun owners. I think an office out of the White House would be a great thing, as long as that was the focus, and we've got the opportunity to do that. So I'm hopeful, Pete, that the next time we get you on the program, we've actually got some news from the Trump administration. Like I said, I hope that we'd learned who the new ATF director, who Trump's choice for the ATF director will be. Still don't have that. Still don't know what's going to happen with that White House office. But hopefully the next time you come on the show, we'll have some answers.
It'll be nice.
It would be. That's all I want for Christmas this year. So, that and good health for the people I know and love. And that includes you, Pete. So thank you very much for coming on the show, man.
Sure. Hey, if I can ask a favor of you and your listeners, we're just a couple of days away from the anniversary of the murder of Brian Terry, Border Patrol agent Brian Terry. He was killed on the 14th of December, 2010, which actually caused Operation Fast and Furious to become learned to some of us agents working in Phoenix. So his family's suffering, man, because they just never got answers. So if we can just keep Brian Terry in our thoughts and prayers on the 14th, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Pete, thank you so much for your time, sir. Look forward to doing this again soon.
Same. Take care.
My thanks to Pete for joining me on the program, and looking forward to having him back again here before long. Hopefully, we will have news about who the ATF director is going to be. I will say I'm getting a little concerned about this. I mean, we're hearing Donald Trump make appointments for head of Voice of America, right? Kari Lake being named as the head of the agency that oversees the VOA. I mean, I think ATF director is a pretty important position. I'd really like to hear something from Donald Trump himself in terms of who that new director is going to be. But I don't know. Maybe he's saving the best for last, I suppose, right? All right, let's turn our attention now to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. We will start there with a case out of South Carolina. Teens shoot at deputy with high-capacity rifles during stolen car chase. This was in Richland County, South Carolina. And the sheriff there, Leon Lott, said that around 2:30 last Sunday morning, a canine specialist, Jeff Coate, spotted a stolen car, began to chase it. There were two 15-year-olds inside that vehicle, including one behind the wheel. The teens refused to stop. One of them actually shot multiple times at Jeff Coate with what the local media describes as high-capacity rifles. I'm not sure what that is, but okay. A car later found to be stolen from Rock Hill, South Carolina. One of the teens located in Rock Hill, the others from Lexington, South Carolina. Another individual with the sheriff's office, Corporal King, put out stop sticks. And after hearing the gunshots and reports from Specialist Jeff Coate that shots were fired at him, Corporal King shot at the teens but did not hit them. The teens, however, wrecked the car after hitting the stop sticks. They both then ran from the vehicle, still holding onto the guns. One of the teenagers broke into an unoccupied home nearby and was found by the K-9. It was Specialist Jeff Coate's partner, Kiro. Another K-9 found the other teen in an outbuilding. According to the sheriff, both 15-year-olds have lengthy criminal histories, including weapons violations, contempt of court, runaway, unlawful carry, point and presenting, which I guess he'd point and present a firearm brandishing, basically, conspiracy, and possession of a pistol by a person unlawfully. Now, again, those are the previous charges that these 15-year-olds have faced. This isn't related to what happened last Sunday. Sheriff Lott says that the teens have routinely been given probation for these offenses, and in fact, at the time of the chase and the shooting, both 15-year-olds were on active probation. He said, I would just hope that whenever they go to court, whoever passes judgment on them will look at these two guns, look at the video that we got, and determine just how dangerous they, meaning the teens, were. They don't need probation again. They don't need some diversionary program again. They've had those chances. They basically spit in the face of the criminal justice system and our judicial system by just continuing doing what they're doing. Yeah, but I would say that the judicial system and the criminal justice system also spitting in our faces by continuing to allow these teens to do what they've been doing. Right? If you are an impressionable teenager, you commit these crimes, you get a slap on the wrist, what message do you take away from that? That you're untouchable? That the criminal justice system doesn't really take these things seriously? That you can continue doing what you've been doing without any impact to your life? God knows the impact you might have on others, but again, the criminal justice system is not going to take these things seriously, so why should the offenders take the prospect of punishment seriously? It is outrageous, again, that we continue to see stories like this, and it's not just in blue states. South Carolina is a very conservative state, but our juvenile justice system is broken. I know, again, that the purpose of the juvenile justice system is rehabilitation, not simply incarceration. I get it. I understand that. But again, when you have 15-year-olds who have racked up a litany of criminal charges in the past and are continuing to do these kinds of things, we're not rehabilitating these individuals, are we? Now, on to today's Armed Citizen story, a follow-up actually from a story we reported on at Bearing Arms this past weekend. A teen shot in an armed robbery at a New Orleans meat market, now facing potential deportation. So this is an update to our original report. It was this past weekend that two teenagers went into a meat market in the Westlake Forest neighborhood of New Orleans and tried to rob the place before one of them was shot and killed by an armed employee. The other one was wounded by that armed employee. The 18-year-old who was wounded, Tioni Juarez, currently being held in the Orleans Justice Center on 4 felony counts of armed robbery with a firearm, aggravated assault with a firearm, and illegal use of weapons. The alleged accomplice of Juarez, again, was killed by that armed employee who drew his concealed carry pistol and opened fire on the offenders. Now, what's interesting here, 16-year-old Cecil Baptiste was the suspect who was shot and killed in this incident. According to the New Orleans Times-Picayune, Tione Juarez described himself as a U.S. citizen when he was arrested, but a spokesman for ICE says that Juarez is actually a Honduran who crossed the border in April of last year near Eagle Pass, Texas, where he was processed as an unaccompanied juvenile. Now, at some point, Juarez made his way to New York because earlier this year, September 21st, as a matter of fact, he was charged with criminal possession of a weapon in New York City. Now, criminal possession of a weapon is generally considered a violent felony offense in New York City. But Tione Juarez was released, apparently, before trial, able to bond out. Maybe he didn't even have to post bond, but was able to leave custody and eventually, again, made his way to New Orleans, where he was allegedly a part of this armed robbery and was shot by the store employee this past weekend. According to ICE, they have lodged a detainer against Juarez that will come into play if he posts bail, if the charges are dropped, or if he is found not guilty in Orleans Parish. But he is apparently not being turned over to ICE immediately. He will face charges in New Orleans again on these 4 felony charges. We'll keep our eyes open for more details on that case as it makes its way through the court system. And finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing, a police officer on vacation in Tennessee who helped save the life of a child while they were at Dollywood. I suspect that Dolly would approve of those actions. Sergeant Paul D'Souza is a Flagler County Sheriff's deputy, Flagler County Sheriff Sergeant. And he was at Dollywood with his family recently when he heard cries for help. And he saw a park employee who was trying to do the Heimlich maneuver on a young boy who had stopped breathing. D'Souza ran over, said he could not see anything in the boy's mouth or throat, but he could tell that the boy was turning blue. So he started performing CPR on this kid. Then there was a paramedic who was also on vacation with his family who saw what was going on. He showed up to assist. The two ended up working together. They got the boy breathing again. Even before an ambulance had arrived, they stayed with the boy, however, until the paramedic showed up. Looks like the child is safe and sound. And again, that is due to the life-saving actions of Flagler County Sergeant Paul D'Souza and the unnamed EMT, who was also in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing for a child in need. So thank you very much, Sergeant, and a big tip of the hat to the anonymous Good Samaritan who also stepped in. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as always. Now, because we have the technical issues on Wednesday, we're going to have a Friday show for you. I don't want you to miss anything. So tomorrow, we'll be talking with Dr. Robert Young from Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. Some good news from the medical community when it comes to deregulating suppressors. We'll talk about that on the next edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Be sure to check out bearingarms.com throughout the day. We're keeping you up to date on all of the latest Second Amendment news and information. The TMI update for Miss E, by the way, is basically status quo. Still in the hospital. Not sure when she's going to get out, so I'll still be working this hybrid schedule, but your thoughts and your prayers are certainly very much appreciated from both of us. So thank you again. We'll see you here soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.